History is often written by victors, but sometimes it is immortalized by those who defy the world's most formidable powers. In 530 BCE, a clash unfolded that would reverberate through the ages, not on the famed battlegrounds of Persia or Babylon, but on the stark, wind-swept plains of Central Asia. There, in the wilderness beyond the known world, the mightiest ruler on earth encountered his downfall, not from another king, but from a queen whose vengeance would etch her name into legend. Queen Tomyris of the Massagetae did more than repel an invader. She redefined the very nature of royal retribution. Her brutal and symbolic justice against Cyrus the Great would become one of the most haunting and powerful episodes in ancient history. This is not merely the tale of a lost campaign. It is a harrowing account of how imperial arrogance, when met by fierce resistance and boundless maternal fury, can lead to a downfall more violent than any siege or war machine. At the height of his reign, Cyrus the Great ruled a Persian Empire that spanned from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of the Hindu Kush. For 3 decades, he had advanced his dominion through unmatched military brilliance, tempered by strategic clemency, a combination that had never failed. His growing empire was a colossus built on subdued nations and crushed resistance, with Cyrus hailed as a liberator, a strategist, and a king of kings. But when he cast his gaze across the Jaxartes River toward the steppes ruled by the Massagetae, a confederation of nomadic tribes known for their savage independence, he underestimated what he would find. These were no soft, sedentary peoples. The Massagetae lived a life of ceaseless movement and warfare. They revered the war god above all others, drank blood mixed with milk in religious rites, and honored prowess in battle over bloodlines. Women fought alongside men, and leadership was earned, not inherited. At the head of this fearsome society stood Queen Tomyris, a warrior sovereign whose authority had been forged not through palace intrigue, but on the battlefield. Cyrus, adhering to his customary policy of conquest through a mix of diplomacy and intimidation, initially proposed marriage to Queen Tomyris, a gesture cloaked in alliance but clearly intended as a means of absorbing her kingdom. But Tomyris, wise to the tactics of empire, saw through the ruse. She refused him outright, warning that any Persian soldier who crossed into her territory would meet death, not submission. The rejection was a deep blow to Cyrus's pride, perhaps even more than outright military resistance. A so-called barbarian queen had dared to spurn the will of the great conqueror of Babylon and liberator of the Jews. For Cyrus, this became personal. What had begun as another imperial expansion quickly turned into a campaign driven by wounded ego and a desire for utter domination. Cyrus prepared for war. His forces advanced into Massagetae land, crossing the Jaxartes by means of a magnificent bridge built by Persian engineers, an impressive display of logistical and technological superiority. At first, the campaign appeared to be proceeding according to plan. Massagetae forces seemed to retreat before the Persians, luring them deeper into unfamiliar territory. To Cyrus, it was a familiar story, the frightened barbarian yielding to the might of civilization. But Tomyris was not fleeing. She was drawing the Persians into the trap she had carefully constructed. The open plains, seemingly barren to outsiders, were known intimately by the Massagetae. Their people had spent generations learning its every path, waterhole, and strategic vantage point. By retreating, Tomyris pulled Cyrus's army away from their supply lines into a vast, desolate battlefield, where her cavalry had every advantage. Then came the first blow. Tomyris sent a small force to engage the Persians in a mock battle, feigning defeat and abandoning a well-stocked camp filled with provisions, including the one Persian weakness she knew well: wine. The Persians, confident in their easy victory, indulged in the spoils. Among the captives taken was Tomyris' own son, Spargapises, a commander in her army. But this too was no accident. She had used her own son as bait to provoke the most dangerous kind of retaliation: maternal wrath sanctified by vengeance. When word reached Tomyris that Spargapises had been captured, she sent a message to Cyrus that was equal parts condemnation, psychological maneuver, and strategic provocation. She offered to trade a third of her army for her son's safe return, challenging Cyrus's honor and daring him to fight her openly. But Cyrus, confident from decades of conquest and convinced of his own invincibility, refused. He did not understand the stakes. Massagetae culture held death in combat as a badge of glory, and Spargapises, unwilling to be used as leverage, took his own life rather than become a pawn. His suicide sent a storm through Tomyris' soul. Her grief transformed her into an avenging force. She vowed vengeance, not in metaphor, but in the most literal sacred sense. "Bloodthirsty Cyrus," she said, "since you are so insatiable for blood, I shall quench your thirst." In her people's spiritual belief, blood was more than a symbol. It was a vessel of life and power. What she promised Cyrus was not death in battle, but a ritual of obliteration. Now fully unleashed, Queen Tomyris summoned the full strength of the Massagetae Confederation. This was no traditional army with ranks and formations. It was a tide of expert horsemen and archers, each trained from youth in mounted combat. They moved without supply lines, surviving off the land, capable of traveling vast distances and striking unpredictably. Their composite bows could pierce Persian armor from far away, and their horses outmatched anything Cyrus's cavalry could muster. Tomyris chose the battlefield carefully, near a river crossing that would limit Persian retreat, on terrain where Persian infantry and siege tactics were useless. The ensuing battle was not a clash of formations, but a whirlwind. The Massagetae attacked in swift waves, disappearing into the steppes before striking again from another direction. The Persians, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves surrounded, disoriented, and unable to mount an effective counter. Cyrus was killed in the chaos. Accounts vary. Some say an arrow felled him while rallying his men. Others suggest he died in the melee of a final cavalry charge. Regardless, his death shattered Persian morale. The survivors scattered, few making it back to Persian territory. The great conqueror had been defeated, not just militarily, but spiritually. But for Tomyris, victory in battle was not enough. She had made a sacred vow. According to Herodotus, Tomyris had her warriors scour the battlefield until they found Cyrus's body. When they did, she ordered the severed head of the fallen emperor to be placed in a wineskin filled with human blood, the blood of the soldiers who had followed him into her land. Then, in front of her people, she declared, "Though I have conquered you in battle, you took my son by treachery. Now I fulfill my oath and give you your fill of blood." This was not barbarism for its own sake. It was a ritual act designed to bind Cyrus's spirit, to deny him peace and to assert Massagetae justice over Persian dominance. To Greek and Persian minds, the act was horrifying, an unthinkable desecration. But to Tomyris's people, it was sacred retribution, a binding rite that ensured balance had been restored. News of Cyrus's defeat and the manner of his death spread rapidly. Survivors told tales of the ambush and the blood-filled wineskin. Merchants and travelers carried the legend across empires. The story became both history and myth, a parable about imperial arrogance, the fury of a grieving mother, and the dangers of underestimating those who fight not for glory but for survival. The consequences for Persia were immediate. the loss of Cyrus and much of his army created instability. Though his son Cambyses would take the throne, the Persian advance was permanently halted on the northern frontier. No future king would attempt to subdue the Massagetae again. The steppes remained free, preserved by the memory of a queen who had faced down the greatest power of her age and triumphed. Tomyris's tactics, leveraging terrain, mobility, psychological warfare, and cultural understanding, would inspire steppe warfare for generations. Her legacy lived on in the military practices of the Scythians, the Huns, and the Mongols. But perhaps more importantly, her story forces us to reconsider the lens through which we view power, civilization, and justice. She showed that barbarians could outwit empires, that maternal love could shape the course of history, and that vengeance, when bound to spiritual belief, could become something terrifyingly immortal. In her defiance, Tomyris did not merely kill an emperor. She shattered the illusion of imperial invulnerability and ensured that her people and her vengeance would never be forgotten.